All right, I think we'll get started and other people may join us as we're in progress. I just want to welcome you all today. I'm Amy Carlson. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Continuing Education Committee. And I want to welcome you here to our final webinar for the season. And I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I'm coming from California early morning and have sunrise here. We are presenting today on why libraries need a policy for the stuff they publish and the stuff they collect. And we are representing NASIG's Digital Preservation Committee. And just one housekeeping note. We do have the question and answer feature, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentation.
I am trying to advance the slide for you, Michelle. And,
I knew you were behind the scenes there, Alicia.
yeah, but you know, it's
not want to advance, huh?
Strange. Let's try there.
There we go. Perfect. I'll introduce myself. I'm Michelle Polchow. I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at the University of California, Davis. And I also co-chair the NASIG Digital Preservation Committee. Alicia will speak next. And Alicia Weiss is the Executive Director of CLOCKS, a third-party preservation entity. And she also co-chairs the NASIG Digital Preservation Committee with me. And Benny Weckham is the founder and CEO of CIFRE, and she is also on our committee. So I am very proud to be presenting with this group, very knowledgeable and dedicated to the preservation community. Our agenda today, we're going to start out with understanding the relatively new year-old NASIG digital preservation model policy. The committee has pulled this together as a way to help libraries preserve and protect what they publish and what they collect. And then we have a case study from CIFRE in developing a digital preservation policy for their publishing services. And I will close with a case study from the University of California, Davis. And we'll be talking a little bit about the implications for library collections. And I think we would like to give a shout out to our members of the working group for the model policy. We had a fabulous representation internationally, and lots of expertise from lots of different areas. So we appreciate our working group that has developed the model policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alicia, who will talk to us more about the policy.
Thanks very much, Michelle. And hello, everybody. Good to see you. Right, the NASIG Digital Preservation Model Policy is a really cool toolkit that can help lots of different kinds of organizations think through and make a commitment, an explicit commitment to digital preservation. And so what is digital preservation? Clearly, it's about looking after electronic content for a long time. So there's some technology stuff around it. But really, the policy word is very important, because in order to preserve content for the long term, we need people and organizations who are committed to its curation. They need workflows and a formalized way of going about it. And a policy can really help an organization to come up with that commitment to document who will do what and to stick to it over time as things change. So digital preservation is a comprehensive means of preserving, safeguarding, and making accessible digital objects for the future. And a policy tells you how you're going to do that. Right, so a preservation policy documents commitments and decisions, but really it underpins the making of deliberate and transparent choices about what you're going to preserve And in fact, just as importantly, what you're not going to preserve. Are you looking only at the content? Or are you looking at the functionality around that content? Is it every email that's ever arrived in your organization that you want to preserve? Is it every version of every journal article through each stage of its production? From early drafts through to preprints and accepted manuscripts and published versions of many kinds, or not? So the important thing here is explicit choices rather than implicit ones. The policy or a policy for your organization will help you answer 2 short questions. And it will help your authors know for certain if they publish with you or cite a work that they've read in your library collection, what is it that people will see in the future when they query the scholarly record? And how close will that compare to what users see now? Excuse me, I'm going to have a little drink of water. Thank you. Sorry about that. Anyway, these questions are not easy to answer, and scholarship is constantly evolving and changing. So if you think about the explosion of, I'm so sorry, of outputs and formats and platforms in recent years, you'll immediately understand that these questions need to be posed and answered again and again. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to just go on pause for a moment here. Excuse me. Anyway, can we preserve all content? Probably not. It's expensive to do so. Resources are finite. And so the most important part of a policy, just to really stress this, is to be thoughtful and transparent about the decisions you're taking about what you're not going to preserve. So the model policy that the NASIG Digital Preservation Group has collaborated to produce is a really useful tool. It guides you through step by step some of the really important decisions that need to be considered in order to develop a policy. And we'll hear from Benny an example of how her organization has gone through this process and the outcome, the conclusion that they reached. To give you a sense of how that policy might be used, it's structured to help you think about and then capture your mandate, your commitment, your scope and goals, to think about workflows, policies, and additional procedures that might be necessary to actually implement the policy in practice. And as a result, if you have a chance to look at the model policy, you'll see that there are options. No one size fits all organizations in terms of developing a digital preservation policy. So you'll find additional context and resources if you need to dive deeper into a particular kind of content or format or a particular kind of preservation challenge. Just to give you a glimpse of the structure of the model policy, which is available on the NASIG Digital Preservation website, before handing over to Benny at the next slide, here is the structure. There's some principles and scope, so you get a quick introduction to digital preservation if this is new to you. You'll learn and have some good advice and guidance about how to administer and keep the policy itself as a living commitment that's up to date and refreshed. You'll find out about all sorts of different preservation tasks and activities and the tools and resources available to help you implement them. And then quite a lot on different roles and responsibilities from people with a hands-on role in preservation, also about how to engage with stakeholders, senior leaders, and funders of the preservation activities to keep them engaged and passionate about what you are doing now and in the long term. But really, the proof is in the pudding here. Let me hand over to Benny, and so we can hear how the model policy can be used in practice.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Everyone can hear me, it's fine. Yeah. So I'm Benny, I represent SciFree, and I'll tell you a bit about SciFree and how this policy actually changed our whole world for the better, and in terms of developing new library services. So if I could go to the next slide. So first, I guess some of you would like to know who is SciFree. We're a software as a service company. We started in 2018 in Stockholm, Sweden. We provide software tools for open access mainly. The mission of our company when we started in 2018 was to reduce academia's publishing workload, to ensure that our tools and services, the researchers and the university will own their data and copyright, and to ensure that that we empower the university's library brand. So you might not know much about Cyphery, but you'd see the university services and their brand on it, because that was what's most important for us. We have a few customers and services. So we service 45 libraries in Sweden, Denmark, the UK, and USA. One of our major services is the journal search tool, which the universities use for their open access agreements and much more, where you can search. A researcher just goes in and searches for the journal, gets the information instead of emailing the library lots of times. And then, of course, there's Dynamica, which is the library infrastructure publishing software that this policy is based on. So the first thing, I'm a researcher, and I started the company and wanted to innovate. And then I started realizing there was something bigger about preservation. You know, open access is great, but will it be around forever? Like if something happens to Cyphery or something else, what's going to happen to the documents? So as being part of the committee in the first year, I started learning a lot. But then once the model policy was out, they said in it, okay, first look at it as a living document. So we decided we were going to do a digital preservation policy, but let's start as a living document. And in that first couple of weeks, we had to decide, what is digital preservation for Cyphery as a company? What is the right scope and language to use? And this is coming that most of us are academics or librarians, as Leanne is, and we didn't really know how to speak in terms of policy language. So we needed to get very, very clear on that. And then, of course, how will our customers gain from this? Because most of the things we do to ensure that our customers wouldn't have to redo it or things like that. So what we ended up doing is making it in Confluence, which meant that not only the management could see it and our customer service agents and things like that, but also our customers and the developers. So we made the document first there so that everyone in the organization can engage, because the scope of the model policy did say it was an organizational document. And then we started working in it. And then we realized this policy was a little bit bigger than what we thought. It was actually, there were several ways to view it, because there's the one way, which is the policy itself, where we identified our responsibilities and limitations. So we were doing that, but then realized in order to identify our responsibilities and limitations, we needed to see how it would work out in the technical specifications for our developers. So then it was like translating the policy language into tech specs in terms of also interoperability when we're working with third-party systems. And then even our hiring practices. Who were we hiring? This was happening the same time that Cyphery was growing. So actually we started to get a little bit clearer on who we needed to interact with in the team and who could join our team. And then on top of all of that, we had to ensure that whatever we did, technically speaking, we needed to make sure that we didn't increase the workflow burden of our customers and the researchers. So there must be automation in the processes, 2 clicks at most, so that we could just make sure that it's happening in the background and it's trusted and so on. And what ended up happening is that the policy was feeding into 3 major areas of our company over and over and over. And that was pretty cool to see. And then we were at the moment we were writing, and of course we were academics and a librarian. We're like, okay, we're not sure, never knew anything about digital preservation. We're like, you know what? Let's ask for help. So the first thing we did is we talked to our customers, and then they said, Abeni, you're in Sweden. We have a Swedish national digital preservation policy in Swedish. My Swedish is okay. I'm technically American. So then we went into that Google Chrome, translated, and then we started talking to the National Library, and they had very exact rules. So then we're like, okay, we don't have to do much. Let's just follow the rules. But then, of course, you have to change a few things because of our services. And of course, we said the technical development. So then when we decided to look at our customer, Stockholm University, that's using Dynamica, and we looked at their implementation of the Swedish national digital preservation rules. And then we got even clearer on what we should write. But as I said to you before, we had the document in Confluence, so they were interacting and checking. And then we decided, okay, let's talk to a third party, because although we were preserving in Asian stuff in our back end and so on, we needed to have a third party interaction if we really wanted to do this well. And so we set up the meeting with clocks, and I have to say this was the best meeting. It was in January, and it changed our whole life. When we were sitting down there listening to Thebe and everyone else from Clocks talking about digital preservation, we realized that not only did we not know anything, but we were taking for granted whether or not third parties would keep their content up. And we realized that we were linking into these systems because, okay, interoperability and so on was important, but they didn't have policies and we could never exact that they should keep their content up. So we changed the way how we even developed the system to make sure that the content could be preserved for clocks and so on, and then hired people who understood that. And from that, we realized that everybody wants to help. So after, I think we spent like a month completely focused on this, and then another 2 months like interacting and things like that. So by November, we had the policy, but then in March, we were like, we're ready to publish. And so you see Leanne here published it on, of course, our platform, Dynamica, where it's CC BY. And you can also see, you can view the entire policy, and you can download the policy in PDF, but also the reviews. So you could see how we reviewed it a little bit. And this is where we said, okay, now we have a proper policy. But what we really liked at the end of all of this was two major things, is that if we really wanted knowledge to be shared at SciFree and through our customers, it must be preserved. That was something we never talked about before in the open access movement and so on, but that became very evident through using this model policy. And the other thing I'd like to say is, because of how the model policy was set up so clear and succinct, it made our work at SciFree, our dreams and vision, a lot clearer and a lot easier to implement, and a lot of fun, to be fair. So that was our story, and I hope it'll encourage you to also join the model policy movement.
All right, I will go to our next case study and really transition here. Our audience members may not be publishers. You may not have content that you're looking to preserve. And so through this lens of the case study at the University of California, Davis, I'd like to switch over to preserving the stuff that we collect, and recognizing every time we enter into a publisher's agreement, there is or is not preservation behind the scenes. So what we are contracting and spending an awful lot of money in academia for, it does have repercussions of our business partners, our publishing partners. So it's a bigger community that we're looking at. And I'll also look at a risk analysis and a new tool that's coming out to help librarians assess their collections. So in the next chart, or the bar chart here that I have, I started a research project based on my work with the Digital Preservation Committee for NASIG. And I was curious as to what the overlap was for UC Davis's collection against the Keepers Registry. And the Keepers Registry is part of the ISSN Center, and they monitor third-party archiving arrangements per ISSN number. So their website does have a browser search where you can look up numbers journal by journal. I had 206,000 journals. So when they suggested they had a browser that I could look them up by, I pointed out that this was maybe a little more than I could look up. And could we maybe figure out a way to do a batch upload? So UC Davis, you walk into a situation with an opportunity. They said, would you be willing to allow us to use UC Davis's data to develop a tool, because this is something we've been wanting to do. So the results of this tool was that only 50,000, or about 40% of our journal titles, so this doesn't get into the coverage, but just the titles themselves were found in the Keepers Registry. So I think knowing that digital preservation is an assumption, I felt like this number could help administrators understand the risk of collections. So if we move to the next slide, I think the licensing element for libraries is an open door to have discussions with publishers and look to see where we can partner in this goal that is often overlooked. I think we're often focused on collections for meeting our faculty needs, our researcher needs. It's very subject oriented, and they always want it fast. So do you have that extra bandwidth to go a little bit deeper? In 2022, a collaborative group across the Northern Hemisphere gathered to kind of look at the LibLicense language, and we determined that there were some areas that needed improved language, and that librarians were really having a difficult time executing the agreements when it came to figuring out what the preservation outcome was going to be. So in the next slide, some of the shortcomings we found in the digital preservation language of existing agreements, which are basically templates from the publishers. So we all share this language. We found that it could be vague, that it would be unclear regarding the precise content and the depth of time that things were preserved. So were they going back to the original publication? Maybe a publisher had picked up a journal title and they were only going to deposit the content under their management. Unnecessarily restrictive in terms of access or use. So perhaps you need to wait until a company goes out of business in order to access things that you subscribe to over time. The other really interesting part of this is that often libraries look at post-cancellation access and feel that that is sufficient preservation, but sometimes this doesn't really dig deeper into the long-term digital preservation and access, that post-cancellation access on a vendor's platform is not necessarily long-term preservation. So having a clarity and understanding by librarians and publishers that those are two different things. Sometimes the administrative burden is really difficult to implement, and then the difficulty to verify that they are complying with these agreements and making the proper preservation deposits. So that is, as we move to the next slide, the group presented a paper, and also NASIG has and we've listed these in our resources at the end of the program to find these documents. But if you are actually doing licensing, oftentimes the job comes without a lot of workflow instructions, and you kind of stumble your way around figuring out how you're going to license and what topics you're going to tackle. So NASIG has this guide that really discusses how you could talk to a publisher about digital preservation, and I think helps educate you. There's a lot of links in it to other to some of the entities. What is preservation? How could you explain that to your publisher if they draw a blank when you ask them about their preservation policy? And so it's dual education as well. I think that the part to making your contribution towards preservation can come in the form of the agreements, as well as just having a discussion about it and educating others. So with that, I think that I'll sum up the total presentation. I like that quote, data of all for good forever. The model policy can be viewed both as a tool for the publisher, but also for librarians to understand what really long-term preservation is, and options. I think it's definitely a community effort, and it's an ongoing discussion. If only 40% of Davis's collection is preserved, we know there's still more work to be done. And I think raising the awareness of how important long-term digital preservation is. I know that we had a plug in our webinar description that, I was finding that we were throwing catalog records out when we didn't have a working link. And that was a bit disturbing, that the scholarly record could be, dripping out of our catalog record by record, as we couldn't reconcile how to find access to things we felt that were important to put on our catalog. So as we mobilize librarians and publishers to be thinking in terms of preservation and refreshing the model, license language definitely is a really helpful document that was produced by this working group. There's a paper that goes into the thought process of how digital preservation can be more integrated and more explicit in our agreements. And then just offering practical guidance for negotiating these rights for libraries, and helping publishers come along to recognize how important this is for academia. So I open it up to questions. And again, the Q&A box, we can take questions that way. And if I missed anything in introductions, summary, Alicia and Abeni, I welcome you to make any comments.
No, it was perfect.
We should maybe make a plug for the Digital Preservation Committee. If this sounds like super interesting work, we welcome any volunteers. Yes. And we do realize it's complicated. We don't expect you to come understanding all of this, that the committee is a great opportunity to kind of learn together. So.
I see one
yes.
comment in the Q&A.
There's one question. And Shannon asked, this is probably for Michelle. After you did the Keepers Registry analysis, did you get any feedback from your administrators?
Good question, Shannon. I think there was kind of radio silence that nobody really wants to tackle. Like, what does she mean? What's the implication of that? I have been making presentations, and a couple of them internal, but it is, I think, doing licensing for resources, it can kind of clamp down on the conversation, and people are like, oh, that licensing language, we don't want to get into that discussion. So I do feel like academia or the administrators are a little concerned about, like, what does this mean and how involved do we have to get, and will we understand it? So it definitely hasn't like sparked a conversation yet. I think it's going to have to be pushed for a while to keep the conversation going.
Michelle's data, though, has helped me spark some new conversations with publishers, because a lot of publishers, and actually library deans that I come into contact with, they kind of think that e-journal and e-book preservation in particular is kind of done, that we've all done our jobs and that's a solved problem, and that the really difficult stuff is other kinds of digital content. So to give an example of a university like UC Davis, and to be able to say, we can only demonstrate with confidence that 40% of that collection is preserved electronically, it sort of causes people to take a step back and to think and reflect again about their assumptions about the state of digital preservation. I found it really empowering. So Michelle, thank you very much for that data point. It is really useful, and it does well, it's a conversation we need to spark more broadly, isn't it?
We have
Oh.
any other? Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
see the next question here.
Okay, good.
Which actually is a good segue because the director of the ISSN Center and I will be presenting at the annual meeting on the new ISSN Plus tool. And so it's, I'm not quite sure when their release date. We haven't practiced our presentation. We're doing that tomorrow. So I don't know what the exact release date is, but it will be an opportunity for libraries to upload their own spreadsheet and run the analysis. And the tool, I haven't seen all of the latest mock-ups, but it will have data visualizations, which I think can be really, really powerful. I think the other opportunity in this tool is to have a community that can talk about ISSN sustainability. Like, you don't often know if a publisher has just stopped publishing for a couple of years or if it has actually ceased officially. So it will be kind of a crowdsourcing opportunity too. And then thoughts about next steps. My department is actually looking at like what will happen when we run into a catalog record and pass that catalog record up to someone to research rather than to have our staff just delete it, which has been the tradition. And I think the other part, I work through the California Digital Library Consortia. So I think I want to be doing some local presentations in opportunities that I have to kind of get the word out there. So those are my immediate plans. And next question from Mickey. I'm confused about where the digital copies are actually kept. I don't know if Alicia, I know that's a technical question, and you're only one of the third-party entities that keep copies. If you want to tackle that.
Sure. So at one level, if you're providing access to your library users to electronic content, that content probably is living either on a publisher platform like the Sci-Free platform that Benny was talking about, or maybe it's in an aggregator platform like the EBSCO site or, those kinds of living copies. But they're not necessarily, that digital information isn't safe and secure because it's not the primary purpose of publishing organizations to kind of curate it for the very long term. So when a publisher shares the content with an archival facility, extra copies will be made, and those will be stored on special platforms, sort of virtual libraries, if you will. They might be in the cloud, they might be servers in rooms around the world. At Clocks, we take 12 copies, and those are on highly secure servers that are based in 12 different large research libraries spread out in different parts of the world. So Japan and the United States, Australia, and in Europe. And each of those copies, they talk to one another and they can detect any errors that occur in the bits, and they can self-repair and heal the content if an error is found. And so there are two answers to your question. At birth, the content lives with the publisher, usually on the publisher's platform. And then when archived, it's probably in a number of different other secure places where it's actively curated, not for current users and current uses, but for long-term access and use.
The next question from Heather. I hear a lot of questions about what type of content preservation libraries are empowered to do via their content licenses. I'm sure the answer is it depends, but how could librarians get started understanding the key elements? If I should take that. Alicia, you want to take that?
Well, I can start and hand over to you. I call out some of the resources on the slide in front of us, particularly the third and the fourth, the LibLicense digital preservation link and the digital preservation language for agreements between libraries and publishers. Those two resources will help somebody reflecting on this for the first time understand what part of their agreement to look at and how to decipher the language that might be there, or what to do if that language is missing entirely or needs to be refreshed. And it'll give you some different, newer, refreshed language to use in its place. It's also got some links which will guide you back to things like the NASIG model policy if further work is needed on the part of the publisher or the library itself. But Michelle, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the group that revisited the language was very thoughtful and came, it was a very diverse group. So we had a lot of input from different perspectives. So I think we all had personal stories where we'd found frustrations. And I think bringing those to the table, like how could we solve those? How could we be more explicit? I think it was real life. It wasn't a theoretical conversation, that they were real case stories that we were trying to solve. So definitely great resources. Let's see, Heather Hankins, does the preservation policy discussions change for you when viewed from a repository point of view? We have a large repository with hosted journals as well, and it can be confusing to explore the space between libraries, publishers, and repositories when it comes to digital preservation. And I will turn this over to either Benny or Alicia to answer.
Alicia, do you want to start, and then I could give an example in Sweden?
That'd be great. Okay, so the first thing I'd say is that repositories host content and make it available to users, but often do not have a digital preservation policy or remit or long-term mandate for long-term preservation. So they aren't archives in that sense. But they are incredibly important places where a very wide range of critical scholarly materials can be disseminated. So sometimes all of the content on those repositories are probably worthy of preservation. So good to know what subset may already be preserved by another stakeholder and where the gaps are, and thoughtful to think about what you can preserve yourself in your own library service and what you might want to partner with another organization to see preserved in a more distributed way. But Benny, can you bring that to life in a more tangible way?
Yeah, sort of. So with CIFRE, a lot of questions were we the repository and so on, but we have something in Sweden called DIVA, which is a little bit outdated. It needs a lot of revamping, but it's exactly as you said, they're meant to hold a lot of content, especially since back in the day before TAs, we were doing in Sweden something called parallel publishing, where we would, you had the papers in the publisher, but because we're so 100% open access, there was this other version of the papers. So it had a different function. And so when you think about the digital preservation policy and preservation, you have to think about, okay, another function, not necessarily making a repository an archive and things like that. So when we spoke to the people at DIVA and, even at SNCC, our repository service, are you losing me? Can you say, yeah. They realized very clearly from the model policy that we were creating another function at which the repository, the journal publisher, and the library feeds into the function. So it wasn't necessarily that, so then it became a little bit clearer because there was another role that needed to be assessed. And then in that case, CIFRE became the one that made a policy for that role, of which these things fed into, rather than trying to make all the things into something that it's not, because they're different functions. So that's how we looked at it here.
You know, I will also add that the model policy tried to gather as many examples as possible to show all the different scenarios. And so I think sometimes walking through the steps of the policy itself starts to trigger thoughts of like, oh, are we doing that? Are we not doing that? Could we do that? So I think the policy tool was really thoughtfully put together with lots of examples to spark that kind of thought process. Any other questions?
I had a question for Abeni, if I may. And Abeni, it was fascinating to me that your technology and your workflows changed when you started thinking about preservation. What was it mostly about ensuring that related resources like data got embedded with the actual publications? What changed? How did that change?
From the outside, what changed is that when we made dynamic and the innovation, every view was very dynamic because we wanted versioning, there was automated peer reviews and things like that. And there was information feeding in from like Twitter and many different sources, because the idea of the software was to bring the work of publishing to the researcher rather than the researcher going out in different places. So the first thing I remember sitting in the meeting, and when Thebe was like, no, you can't preserve YouTube videos or things like that, I was like, oh no. So in that case, we were like, okay, there was that problem. But then that's just in what our vision wanted to do for the research in the library and bringing in. So then we had to think about how to build the software that we do allow for building in, but then we took snapshots and kept afterwards, right? So then there was a snapshot at the end afterwards, which we weren't thinking about before, but after that, we made it such. So that was the technical bit. And then I think, the other thing was who you hire. That was the biggest part. Because a lot of people, I mean, especially for me, being a researcher now running a tech company, everyone's like, oh, front end, back end, da, da, da. Great, that's great. But then when you start talking to them about the domain or digital preservation, a lot of people will just say like, oh, that's whatever. Like literally, oh, it's not that important and so on. And we triage people. We're like, okay, you think it's not important, then you can't work for CiteFree. If you don't think, accessibility is something else, then you can't work for CiteFree. So it got very clear for us. These are the things that are important because we have this policy. So we only hired people that knew that it was important. So then it was easier to develop. They know where we want to go and what our customers need, but they know at the back of their minds, there's snapshots that need to be taken. We need to be careful when we're pulling in things from third parties and things like that. So that was how it changed for the better, I think. Yeah. There's a question for me. Yes, Rachel, it says, having not read our policy, was the end result putting the policy in place to make arrangement with clocks as a third party? Yes, and more. So for sure with clocks, because they have this system of 12 different libraries, and I could sleep well at night. But then there's also things that we do with the Swedish National Archives, because that's mandated. So it's going into the Swedish National Archives through DIVA. So there must be an API that goes there. And then there's also, now that we work, Leanne and all of us, I must say that Leanne is the person on our team that knows this the best and did most of the work. She's amazing. So then there's work for us to look at every country that we work with to make sure that they have national archives and then also do that. So it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to make sure that everyone's rules are met. But for CiteFree, we get to sleep better at night with clocks. And then we also have systems set up with our servers and things like that too. But knowing that clocks is there or someone like that lets me go to bed at night. So yes.
I should be reading this out loud. I'm not a very good moderator. Thank you so much for this presentation. We have in our catalog many OA resources from third-party content creators. where we do not necessarily have any relationship agreement, and these content creators may be small operations where it's unlikely there's any preservation policy in place. Any suggestions for what librarians can do to ensure that these materials are preserved? Alicia?
Yes, and I think DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and DOAB and the OAPN platform are playing really important roles here. Because they provide discovery services for open access journals and open access books, they have also stepped up and are playing an education role in helping the publishers of these journals, whether they are formal publishing organizations or scholars for scholar-led diamond open access journals. The DOAJ and DOAB are getting the word out about why preservation is important, and they're also facilitating it to make it much easier. So, for example, DOAJ has launched the Jasper project. It's really easy for diamond open access journals, literally to click a button on their DOAJ profile and have the content flow into a choice of archives. So support DOAJ and DOAB in that role. If you know of something that you're worried about not being preserved, let them know. They have so many contacts into that world. It's amazing, and they're doing a great job.
You know, I do think too, we have found like checking for material on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, that sometimes it has been captured, and it was very unusual that we had a dead link in United States Geological Society, USGS, and they actually came back and pointed to the Wayback Machine was where they found their own content. So I think sometimes you can hunt around, and I think that's like the problem that we have for bandwidth. No library has this extra time. Like, whose job is it to go and kind of figure out if we can still find the content? And I do know we had a troubleshooting. I'd love to dig this up and see if I could find this professor, but this professor wrote a ticket to us and he said, I've been looking and looking and looking for this journal content and I can't find it. Do you think you could find it for me? And I looked and I looked and I looked and I could not find it for him. And I still want to go back and ask him, like, what was the impact of that? And again, kind of making the administrative case for empowering job descriptions to have this type of bandwidth to tackle these problems, because it does take time. And sometimes you need to be the expert in the subject area to kind of know where you might be able to find, hopefully as we get better at the third party preservation, that we would have that skill set to look for it. So I think that's a really, really good question, because it's where the rubber hits the road and you end up not, you're offering something in your catalog and pretty soon it just disappears. That's not a good thing to have our scholars cite. How are we doing on time? I do want to maybe put a call out to this group if there is anyone interested. I'm struggling to get a skill set together to do an overlap analysis at a date coverage level, which my suspicion is if 40% of our titles are found in the keeper's registry, what happens if I drill down to our coverage? And could I find out there's even less than 40% covered? Because we all know dates can, Shannon, that'd be fabulous. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked this question. Okay.
Michelle and Shannon, I've also heard that Martin Eve, who founded Open Library for the Humanities and is now at Crossref, is working on a tool that would enable analysis based on DOI metadata and cross-checking to kind of flag up time depth analysis of what's been preserved and what's not. I've not seen him present on this yet, but he is scheduled to speak next week at an ALPS conference, which is free for libraries and publishers. Let me see if I can find the URL for that. That might be relevant to the project that you just cooked up between you as well.
Well, that would be great. Shannon, I assume you will be at NASIG's annual conference, so I will track you down.
Sorry, last chance for questions. Any questions from the group?
Great. Thank you, Alicia, for the link. And we will, again, anyone that's interested, can anyone worldwide contact the keepers? Definitely. The keepers has a technical advisory committee that will review entities that are interested in being recognized as a keeper. You can contact the keeper with any updates if you have specific journals and they're not accurate, up to date. And, you know, Brett, if you're looking to do an overlap analysis, I'm not sure what perspective you're coming from. The ISSN Plus tool to do an overlap analysis on a large scale will be coming out, but you are able to do for free, just be able to input an ISSN number in the keepers and be able to find out its archival status. You need to click around a little bit to get that window to open, but you can do one-offs that way. So I hope I got at the angle of what service you were looking for. So with that, we really, really appreciate our audience today. We hope you found this information useful. Definitely reach out to any of us. Reach out to the committee on the NASIG site and we will get your email that way. But definitely an ongoing conversation, that a lot of work to do in this area. So we welcome any collaborators in any manner.
And new members.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. This was really, really wonderful. And I just want to tell the attendees who are still here that a video of the presentation today will go out to you, but it may take a little bit, probably look for it in about a week, and or hopefully less. And I'll also check with everybody to see if we can get the slide deck or at least a list of links. So thank you so much for joining us.